Chapter 9, Part 2. Jim decided that having heron delivered fresh trout 3 times a week was so strange that the best thing he could do was accept it and not make too much fuss. Suzanne mentioned the first 2 incidents to her friends at work, but then she left it. Aubrey never even thought of telling his friend Harrison. Harrison was not really into herons. Mr. Ferriby thought about telling the newspapers or starting a remarkable heron blog, but he did not. Something was going on next door and he wanted to know what would happen next, so he kept quiet and kept watch. The business with the raven began when Jim was taking his daily walk. Jim knew he needed regular exercise, but he panicked a bit at being seen out in the world, wandering around, when all his friends and colleagues were hard at work. Aubrey overheard him telling Suzanne he was ashamed of being signed off sick. "I should hide in the house until I'm better," he said guiltily. Suzanne said hiding in the house was no way to get better. So Jim took little walks up and down the lane. They barely counted as exercise, Suzanne and Aubrey thought, but they seemed to make him happy, and he paused every few metres to study plants and birds and the sights of the valley, which was an improvement on staring at his feet. He took his precious binoculars with him and bird-watched. These binoculars were incredibly light and wonderfully powerful. Jim said they gave him the eyes of a falcon. As he wandered down the lane with his binoculars, falcon-eyeing the woods, the skyline and the birds moving through the trees along the stream, Jim failed to spot that he was being followed. He would have made a lousy falcon. He was leaning on a low stone wall, staring at the meadow below, his binoculars dangling idly from one hand, when his stalker struck. There was a sudden jerk, a mighty tug at his left hand, and his binoculars were gone, snatched. "Hey!" he cried, spinning round. Jim's binoculars were hanging in mid-air. "Hey!" His binoculars, his precious binoculars, were dangling from their strap. The strap was held tight in the claws of a huge black bird, bigger than any crow, with a hackle of feathers like a beard at its throat, a beak like a fat curved dagger, and a look of dark amusement in its eye. A raven. The raven flew off down the road, gathering up the binocular strap and looping it over its neck. Now the bird landed on a wall 40 yards away. "Give them back!" shouted Jim. "Pruck!" shouted the raven. Jim ran at it. The raven waited until Jim was almost within reach, flapped off, landed 40 more yards away, bobbed his head and shouted, "Pruck!" again. Jim covered these yards even faster. "Har!" called the raven, as Jim closed with it and set off again. By stopping and starting, by landing and taking off again, by swooping and teasing, the raven made Jim run nearly a mile, right down to the edge of town, before flying over his head and making him run nearly a mile back again, the other way. Not for a moment did Jim consider giving up. Laying the binoculars gently on Jim's doorstep, the raven looked him in the eye, croaked something that sounded like "Var-ar-ar," and flew away. Jim put his hands on his knees, bent double, and panted like a hot dog. He was shattered. The muscles in his legs felt as though someone had set fire to them. His lungs burned, his vision wavered, and he thought he might be sick. But he had surely taken some vigorous exercise. And exercise, as everyone knows, is very good for you. "Corex," the raven said. "Corex, Corex." "Your parents named you twice?" Aubrey asked. He was not exactly scared of the bird, but he was wary of it. Anyone would be. It was huge, with a loud, throaty voice and an accent that sounded as if it came from somewhere near the Tower of London. They were in the attic, the raven gripping the edge of the skylight, its fearsome claws digging into the wooden frame. With its great sharp bill and spiky beard, Aubrey thought it was like talking to a pirate king. "We're all Corex. My brother is Corex, Corex, Corex. My sister is Corex, 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 Corex. My nephew is—" "I see," said Aubrey. "So, what are you into?" "Death and acrobatics," crowed Corax. "You know the secret of happiness? Death. The Grim Reaper, the Lady in Brown, the final trumpet, the end. Good old graveyards cheer anyone up. Anywhere you can guarantee a lot of death, that's the place to go. Dead people, dead animals, squashed hedgehogs, bloated bodies, rotten sheep, splattered things. Find some of them. Have a good gulp. Now, don't you feel better?" That's not you, is it, under a gravestone, whitening down to a set of bones? That's not you with a tyre track tattoo, squished flat, eyes popped and a belly full of maggots? No, you're alive, and dead things are your friends. They fertilise the soil and fill the stomach. You eat dead plants, dead animals. Maybe you don't pick 'em up when they're rotting, but it's the same thing. I just like the stronger flavours. What do you like? I like chocolate, Aubrey said. Dead cocoa beans, Corax croaked. Lovely. Course it's harder being a raven now than it used to be. They don't hang people like they did in my great-great-grandfather's time. They used to leave 'em swinging on the gallows to get pecked. People went to look at the bodies, even while Grandad was eating 'em, because it cheered him up. They felt alive. And gibbets, where gamekeepers used to hang the animals they shot, they've gone. There's so much clearing up these days you hardly get more than a couple of pecks at a roadkill before someone pinches it. Tell your dad to go and get an eyeful of death and a good strong sniff of it. Tell him from your Uncle Corax, in a century or so, the grubs that ate him will have been eaten by moles, which will have died of old age and been eaten by grubs, and all that's left of him will be grub poo. And that's all that'll be left of most of us, grub poo. That's the future, tell him. He will feel fantastic. We're only here for a couple of decades if we're lucky. Makes it a lot easier to enjoy life when you think about it like that. Makes you want to do some acrobatics. Pretty you can't fly. I could teach you to loop the loop. I'd like that, said Aubrey. By the time I've finished exercising him, your father will be turning somersaults. That's good, Aubrey said, but I'm not sure about all this death stuff. Now one is, cackled Corax. You might not be sure of death, but you can count death sure of you. Ka-ka-ka! I can see it works for you, Corax, said Aubrey, but it might make some people feel a bit gloomy. That's because I am a joyful pessimist, which is someone who sees the gloomy side of things and laughs. Have you met Mr. Velvet Humps? Mr. Velvet Humps? Who is he? Mr. Velvet Humps is a mole. What you might call a measured optimist. What does that mean? Someone who sees the bright side of things but likes to keep it calm. He lives in the field. Why don't you go and have a word? See what he thinks your old man should do. Corax flew away.